thank you so much for inviting me today on a topic that's very near and dear to my heart, which is about how you make sure that as you internationalize your business, you make sure that you do it successfully and profitably. So you've heard all this already from Hannah. I won't dwell on it, and hopefully you'll get these slides not long after today on the Elite Business Live portal. But let's get into the detail of what is it that I want to sort of cover over the next 25 minutes. And in no particular order, firstly, I want to talk a little bit about the importance of doing your homework. If you're going to internationalize, there aren't any shortcuts on that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, including some anecdotes. The second thing I want to briefly cover is the importance of getting local and understanding what it smells like, what it's like in a local marketplace, and what you do to adapt in order to be relevant. Because while you may be in multiple countries, or you may just be in one, as soon as you internationalize, you can't assume that what works at home works everywhere. So I want to talk a little bit about how you might do that, and again, more examples. And then last but not least is how you manage these risks. Because, of course, when you internationalize, it's fraught with all sorts of challenges, not just legal, not just political, but the challenges generally are from your own organization much of the time. So let's get into the first of our three main headings, which is the importance of doing your homework. So as you can see, there are 6 pictures behind me. Some are good, some are not good, as examples of companies that have done their homework or maybe not so much. So I will briefly touch on this. So first of all, Coca-Cola. So Coca-Cola does its homework about different parts of the world in great detail, to the extent that they actually understand that the levels of sweetness and the levels of carbonation that you expect in any of their soft drinks will match the taste profile of a particular geography. And they test, and they test, and they test. Now, where they came unstuck might be on their Dasani water that you may recall some years ago. Coca-Cola got in a bit of trouble for taking water from the tap. Actually, not technically, not literally the tap, but it was water from Thames Water, the utility. And they bottled it after they took out some minerals and other things that are in the water, the taste of the chlorine maybe, and then put it in a bottle and had us think that it was from springs or wells, when in fact it was actually just regular water that had been filtered. So while they may have done their homework in one way, in understanding different parts of the world and varying the sweetness levels and the carbonation, yet in another place they took an American product, Dasani, brought it here, and then came unstuck because we all found out, as we do today with social media and that level of transparency, that actually maybe you need to pay more attention and assume that you cannot hide. Then we have the picture there in the middle of the dragons on Dragon's Den. Now, why is that interesting? Why is that about doing your homework? Not just because you get a good grilling if you put yourself forward to be a business that you're looking for any of them to invest in, but because the format of Dragon's Den, known as Shark Tank, actually was an import, or this is an import, of the American format there too. So again, why didn't they call it Shark Tank in this country? Because they did their homework. And it showed that the viewer, yourselves, business audiences like you, wouldn't respond so much to a name Shark Tank, but you would respond more to Dragon's Den. So that homework ended up showing that it's probably a good idea to not necessarily copy-paste wholesale, but to actually do something a little different that's relevant to a particular market. Dairy milk, why do we care about that? Because again, that varies from different parts of the world. Many years ago, I was commissioned by a market research company to go research low-calorie candy in the US. Because Cadbury was thinking that this is a market that's growing, that consumers increasingly are watching their weight, they're watching their sugar intake, they're watching fat content, etc. So I go to the States and I research the market there for Cadbury, or via their agency, and I learn a whole lot. namely that low-calorie candy there is a hugely popular category. Believe it or not, Americans are very happy to have a full-fat, carbonated soft drink perhaps, but a diet candy bar. So I come back with that information. We do the same research, asking the same questions here in the UK and throughout Europe on behalf of Cadbury, and what happens? Consumers in Europe said, we would not at all be interested in a low-calorie candy bar, because frankly, if you're gonna have a candy bar, then enjoy it. Don't try to mix both and have a candy bar, but then take the guilt out of the candy bar by knowing it's lower sugar or fat. Who cares? If you're gonna have it, enjoy it. So that was really insightful, and it did drive the direction of the market research function at Cadbury in terms of what count lines they launched thereafter here in Europe versus the US. Volkswagen, they had a little problem not too long ago. You may remember putting a defeat device in the cars to mask the level of emissions. And again, this got this company in trouble. They also, on the April Fool's Day a couple of years ago, decided they would announce that they would change their name from Volkswagen to Volkswagen with a T, because they wanted to amplify their success in the electric car EV market. Well, very unfortunately for them, the markets reacted and thought, oh, okay, that's interesting, but we're gonna take a hit, we're gonna discount their share price because their progress in the electric vehicle domain isn't really as high as a lot of their competitors. So even though it was a joke on the 1st of April, a couple of years ago, unfortunately, they thought that that humor would work everywhere, and of course it didn't. So the research was done on the fly. What would have been smarter is if they had checked first, would this work? Would this have an impact on how the financial markets think of us if we said jokingly we're changing our company name? But that didn't really happen, unfortunately. Now, the next example, bottom center, is Starbucks. And the reason this is interesting is because you see in the bottom right a picture of a very large cup, which is called Trenta. For the Italian speakers in the room, you'll know that Trenta means 30 in Italian, 30 ounces. If you've ever seen a 30-ounce cup of a hot drink, just to put it in perspective, and by the way, this drink is quite popular in the US as a product size. I'm sure you're not too surprised. Bigger is better in America, which we know. One of the things about that is that it's a full bottle of wine and a few more ounces on top. And the capacity of the human stomach is not 30 ounces. Yet, this is a size of drink that's sold in America. I don't know how widely sold it is, but it's on offer. Now, that 30-ounce cup appeared on the local Starbucks store shelves here in Europe, in the UK, across the continent. And not long after, that 30-ounce cup disappeared. Now, was this a market research test to see could we bring a 30-ounce drink to Europe? Would Europeans embrace a supersize hot drink? Well, you voted and said, absolutely not. This is ridiculous, so it's not here. But that's one other way to do your homework, is to test. And you'll know, as high-growth companies in this room, that test and learn is the way that you rapidly iterate, that you learn a lot, and you have to keep checking things against the market expectations and tastes to learn what you need to adapt if you want to grow. Last but not least is the very probably overused example of Tesco's American foray, Fresh and Easy, which you may know was a California store format, grocery store format, and didn't last all that long, a couple of years, and then they sold it, exited, and took a huge financial hit for leaving the US market. So this didn't play out well for Tesco, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, namely that they did the homework, so they spent millions of dollars replicating a full-size store in a soundstage in the eastern part of Los Angeles in Riverside County. And they tested everything. So the soundstage was to hide the store from the competition so that Trader Joe's and all of the other local players couldn't see what Tesco were doing or thinking. They recruited people like us to come in, shop. They tested the trolley size. They tested the lighting. They tested the merchandising. But when it came to reality, you would find the chiller cabinet, as I did when I visited their store in Hollywood, on Hollywood Boulevard. You would find in the chiller cabinet the 99-cent ready mashed potato next to the $49 bottle of Veuve Clicquot. Now, I want to know who that consumer is, because that, to me, doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. So, and unfortunately, despite having done all that research, it wasn't applied. It didn't filter through the business. So, getting local. Why do we care about getting local? Because that's how you make money, because you have adapted. Think about maybe that Coca-Cola example where they change the sweetness, they change the carbonation levels, depending on what part of the world they're in. But these are some examples of going local or not. Pret a Manger, when they opened their store in the United States, they started in Manhattan many years ago now. Gosh, maybe a good 12, 15 years ago. And the thing they assumed was that Americans will want butter on their bagels, as well as the cream cheese and salmon. Well, definitely not. We either have butter or we have cream cheese, but we don't have both. So people were confused. Shoppers, you know, Midtown Manhattan office workers would go in and think, wait, what is this? So it demonstrated that maybe they didn't get local enough. However, a good example of getting local is McDonald's, believe it or not. Why? Because they do local fare. So in the Middle East, they have a sandwich called the macarabia. In India, they have a sandwich called the makorma. In France, they offer macarons, those lovely pastel-colored cookies. In various parts of the world, in Southern California, my home originally, they have Mexican items on the menu. So you can get tacos and nachos and other things that you wouldn't think McDonald's would do. So they're quite smart. They still offer the core menu that we all know, Big Macs, fries, shakes, etc. But they also offer things that are local and specific to the countries where they are. The top right is really interesting. So this is the IKEA print catalog. This is the catalog from Saudi Arabia from a few years ago. On the left-hand side, it's probably a little hard to see, but you see a family in the bathroom. The children or the child is on a elevated stool to be able to reach the sink. And you see a mom and dad and another small child. And in the picture on the right, you don't see the mom. Why is that? Because in that region, IKEA got a lot of pushback for showing women and men in the same setting, and culturally not okay. So it ended up for IKEA, they had to pulp thousands of copies of the IKEA catalog and edit the picture and reissue the catalog to be more culturally aware and sympathetic. Bottom left, Cloverleaf. This is a brand that no longer exists. It was acquired. It's now part of other tableware brand, much bigger brand. But this was their sort of placemat and coaster set that you could buy in most, you know, UK department stores when we had department stores. Not many left now. But what's interesting about this example is the fact that the placemat there is for a UK table, so the cutlery goes off the placemat and the plate goes on it. So they went to America, they went to the Atlanta Gift Fair, a huge international trade fair for people, companies in the giftware sector. And the Americans just looked at this and said, that's nice, what should we do with it? And Cloverleaf said, what do you mean, it's a placemat? And the US market said, well, that won't work for us because we put our cutlery on the placemat. There's no chance we're going to get a plate and the cutlery on something that size. So, yes, they should have done their homework, but also, yes, they should have localized and come up with a different version for that particular market. Interestingly, this picture, set of pictures in the bottom right is a Microsoft print ad. So you'll notice two images there, the American ad on the left and the ad that ran in Poland on the right. You'll notice a change of ethnicity of the man in the middle picture for some reason for the Polish market, that Microsoft thought, well, this is localization, we're really good at localizing, and what you may not be able to see that clearly because it's somewhat small, but the hand of the gentleman in the middle is not as white as his face. It's the same hand as the black man in the first picture. Sloppy, and it backfires. And we think, wow, clearly Microsoft doesn't care enough about the Polish market, or they would have taken the time and care to get this kind of thing right. So these are expensive reputational mistakes that companies like us, and you in here today, and you watching at home, can't afford to make. You've got to do the homework, there's no shortcuts, and you've got to do the localization. So, here's another example. This is my favorite. This is Nestle in Japan. And I'm only showing you 6 of the Kit Kat variants that you could get, the different flavors in Japan. If you go and Google Kit Kat Japan, you will get all the other flavors that they do. And there are probably a good 25 flavors, but what's interesting, and all credit to Nestle in localizing, is not only localizing flavors. Top left, you have green tea, strawberry, never seen strawberry in the UK or other parts of the world. You've got some other varieties. That purple one is a sort of plum fruit flavor. There's also a wasabi Kit Kat. I'd love to try that. I haven't had the chance to try that yet. But what's interesting is the packaging. So in Japan, Kit Kat bars are sold usually in a nice card box. It's shiny, it looks giftable. And in fact, it is giftable. And that's why it's so successful there. There's a space on the back of the carton to write a personalized note to the person that you're going to give the Kit Kat to as a little gift. It could be good luck on your driving test, congratulations on passing an exam, for any occasion. So that's something that we do not see here in Europe or in the US for that matter with Kit Kats. So this is a really good idea, not just because of the flavors, but also the packaging, and they know the giving occasion. It isn't for me to consume the Kit Kat, it's for me to give it to someone else. Last but not least, managing your risks. So as you are expanding internationally, as you want to do more things by way of understanding local markets, making those localizations, you need to make sure you've got at least these 4 things in the bag. So, and they're all equally important, by the way. The first one is time. What's really key is, as you internationalize, you absolutely have to pay attention to how long it's going to take to break even. Do not set unrealistic targets. You're not going to break even in a year, or 2 years, or 3 years. And realistically, it's more like 5 years. The second thing is the buy-in from the leadership in your business. If you're the sole advocate of internationalizing, it won't work. You have to definitely bring other people with you, and you have to convince others in the business that this is the right thing for the business strategy. Third, money. You can't do this for free. You can't do it inconsistently. It's got to be part of your bigger business plan. And last but not least, data and analysis and research. Critically important if you're going to internationalize successfully. So, on the back of a few of these thoughts, a few questions, I guess. Maybe I can, do we have time for Any questions?
Well, let's give Alison a huge round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alison. So let's shuffle along a little bit so we can see the questions that are coming through here on the screen. And I also have a few for you as well. So I think, firstly, we forgot to mention that McDonald's, in its quest to internationalise, also sells beer in France.
That's true.
Which I think is a key one that was missed.
Beer in Germany and wine in France as well.
Why don't they do it here?
I don't know.
Can't be trusted. So
I don't know. It's a great question.
So lots of the examples you gave were kind of quite big businesses, right?
Yep.
So for smaller companies, is it less of a risk if you make a mistake? Because obviously if McDonald's get it wrong or Microsoft get it wrong, that is all over social media and brand damaging within an instant.
Absolutely.
But for smaller companies, surely you can test and learn a little bit more.
Yes, you can. And in fact, I do think it's more risky for smaller companies than the big McDonald's, Coca-Colas, Volkswagens, because in a way the pockets aren't as deep. So you need to be even more careful. And that's why it's so important to be methodical in doing that research and making sure the research isn't just done to tick a box and then the report sits on a shelf somewhere. You've absolutely got to share that information across the business, and you have to educate the other people around you in the company. Here's what I found out, or here's what we found out on the back of doing the homework. How do we digest all that rather than, okay, well, we did that exercise, so what? Now let's get back to the real job. No, you've got to use the data.
So on that point, again, coming back to kind of smaller businesses, right? So lots of entrepreneurs that I speak to, they start out their kind of export journey by mistake, frankly. So they might be selling a product or service. I see lots of nods of recognition. And, you know, they get orders from overseas and they never had any intention to internationalize yet. So, oh gosh, what do I do now? That happens more and more frequently, especially given the advent of social media, right?
Yes, it does, absolutely. And so one of the things that drives, therefore, is it's very tempting to say, oh, we're getting all this interest from the US or France or South Africa or Australia. So I know, we'll just put an office there. We'll hire an agent there. And actually, you can't do that. Please don't do that. Do the homework. Do a cost-benefit analysis. Is it worth it? Are we going to make enough money? Is what we sell even interesting to those parts of the world? So it's very tempting to be opportunistic, but it can be really expensive, and it can be your undoing if you are driven by that opportunism and not by it being part of the business strategy of, look, we have a plan, we want to expand, and we're not going to do it formally until this date or this time frame. So you have to resist the temptation.
Okay, so, but you could still accept the odd order, but you're saying in terms of kind of, you know, really going for it, you should have a plan.
Sure,
right,
you should have a plan, absolutely.
Got it. So you were talking before about kind of names and if names translate across into new markets, which I always find very interesting. And there's a lot to be said about a name, right? And I'm going to share a really quick anecdote because, and I'm sure he wouldn't mind because he shared it publicly. So Richard Morris, one of our favourite entrepreneurs, his business is called moo.com. You'll know it.
Yes, I know it.
Business cards and stationery.
Yep.
When he first launched it, he called it pleasure cards.
Oh, no.
And pleasure cards just has all the wrong connotations, doesn't it? So that's one that doesn't even translate in the UK.
No.
But when you're thinking about this, should you be thinking about it from the very beginning, even if internationalization isn't on the cards yet?
Yes.
Should you look up what that word means in multiple different languages?
Yes, yes. And so the car industry is loaded with
give us some
these great examples. So Chevrolet is an American make of car. I'm sure many of you have heard of them. They took a model that's really popular in America called the Nova. Which is as in supernova. But then when it took the brand and the model to Latin America, Nova, for Spanish speakers, you'll know it means doesn't go. Nova. So all of these consumers are thinking, why would I want to buy a car that says doesn't go? So there are several other car brand names.
Can you give us another one? These are so good. Keep them coming.
So the Rolls-Royce Silver Stream was one of the models. And again, they decided, oh, Germany is a big market for us. We'll take the Silver Stream and it'll go to Germany. And we'll just do the translation. You know, how hard is that? Silbermist. For German speakers, Silbermist is a stream of urine. So another bit of a problem. So in a way, also the copywriting, you have to back translate. You can't just forward translate. So KFC learned this the hard way with Finger Lickin' Good, which is their strap line, or has been their strap line for a long time. And in China, when they forward only translated it, and it was on billboards all over, and their general manager for China, who's obviously international speaking, said, "Oh my God, it says, so good you'll suck your fingers off." Gee, we probably should have done a little more work on this before we bought all that media space.
Well, and that's the thing, because now obviously your brand name isn't just on the packaging or the product, it's on your website, it's on all your social media handles. So it's more important than ever to get that stuff right at the outset.
Absolutely right, yeah.
Okay, and so when you talk about kind of this homework piece, that sounds to me, I hear expensive. I hear, well, it sounds great in some respects. I love a couple of months away from the kids, you know, doing some research, maybe somewhere nice and sunny and warm. But how can you do that in a way that's efficient, but also, you know, kind of gets to the point, gets to the root? Yeah.
Well, one of the things we're all incredibly lucky to have at our fingertips is the web. And a lot of research now can be done super affordably online. And you don't need to part with any money. You just need to be really clear on what your search terms are. But you will uncover, for free, an incredible amount of information about your sector and about what other companies have got right, have got wrong. So actually, it's a lot cheaper and easier now than it's ever been before. I mean, in the past, before probably you may not have even been born yet in the time when I was working with fax machines in the 80s when I moved to this country in the late 1980s. You know, there wasn't the web, so you couldn't do that research. You had to buy reports from big market research houses that were thousands of pounds, and now you don't have to do that. So actually, you can do a fair amount just from your front room. Better still, you can affordably buy a plane ticket, go to the market, and just pay attention and watch what you see people do, whether you're in consumer or if you're a B2B, a professional service. You can watch and talk to people in the marketplace, and it doesn't cost a lot.
Excellent. Right, I have loads more questions for you. Do we have any from the floor? We've got a mic if we need one. Not yet. They still need waking up after lunch. We're going to have to get Ollie up here to do a song. So what companies do you most admire, before we get the panel on, what companies do you most admire for their kind of prowess overseas? Yeah,
what a great question, because there's a lot. So I would say L'Oreal would be one of the companies that I really admire for both men and women in terms of their skincare and their cosmetics ranges. They have different formulations, they have different fragrances, they have different color ways. They are in different retail locations. They also own a range of brands, and they're highly acquisitive. And they buy brands that are going to work in different parts of the world, and they get the global local right. So for me, L'Oreal are a really good example of being able to do, here's what we are good at home, here's what we're good at internationally. I guess in the professional services space, there's a number of law firms, accountancy firms, who are really good at understanding that service looks different in different parts of the world. So obviously, as the writer of a book working with Americans that you mentioned earlier, Americans are incredibly impatient. So if you're in a professional service and you've not answered the American email within, an hour, the assumption pretty much is, oh, you've left the company, you got hit by a bus, something's happened. Whereas here, you're a lot more forgiving, so thank you. You'll take a little more time and care, and you'll answer when you have data, whereas we just answer to let you know that we're still working there. I don't have an answer right now, but I'll be back to you shortly, just to give reassurance. So things like that.
That is a great tip. We have a question, so can we get a mic over to this lady in the middle here for Alison, please? We'll keep this really pithy so we can get our panel on. That would be great. The lady in the middle with black top, thank you very much. See, it's good. I knew they were awake, really.
Thank you, Alison. It's really interesting because my consultancy is called Riyadh Consultancy, and I never knew at the time, but Riyadh is actually football in Arabic. Currently. But my question to you would be, would the same advice still apply if it was a product or a service that you're looking to expand overseas?
Absolutely. So back to your, really briefly, one company, I hope they're not here today, a couple of years ago approached me after a talk and said, we're planning to grow in America. Our company is called Bespoke. Do you think that'll be a problem? And I said, oh, that's a huge problem, because in America, that word doesn't exist. And so you think, oh, bespoke, it's got all these great connotations, customized, and no one in the US will have a clue what you're talking about. So luckily it's not called that. Yeah, paying attention to that sort of thing is really important.
Great
question.
Thanks. Loads of tips from Alison coming up in the panel. Will you stick around?
I'd love to.
Okay,
Thank you.
please take a seat
Great.
as our panelists join us on the stage. Thank you very much.